Welcome to this day in his story, created by American Heritage Worldwide. A reminder that every day holds something new to learn. Did you know that some of Emily Dickinson's poems can be sung to unlikely tunes such as The Yellow Rose of Texas or the Gilligan's Island theme song? Hum along with us as we learn how Dickinson rejected the common iambic pentameter found in English verse in exchange for hymn meter that lent itself to singing.
Today, we're taking a really fascinating turn, sort of slipping behind the curtain of American letters to explore one of its most brilliant and profoundly private figures, Emily Dickinson. You know her work, those short, almost breathless lines, all the dashes, the poems that feel like a lightning strike of insight. But here's the core paradox, the thing we're really going to unpack for you today. How did this writer, who lived this incredibly secluded life in 19th century Amherst, Massachusetts, and published almost nothing while she was alive, how did she manage to produce a body of work that, well, fundamentally changed poetry forever?
It's just a staggering human story. I mean, her physical life was lived in such incredible constraint, she rarely left her family home.
Right.
Yet her mind traveled to the absolute edges of language, of faith, of the cosmos. And the sheer scale of her productivity during that time, that seclusion, is what truly defines her internal intensity.
The scale is something else.
Oh, it is. Our sources confirm she produced over 1,700 poems. And the majority of that output, it was all concentrated into this white-hot 6-year period.
6 years.
Just 6 years, between 1858 and 1864. And she was composing them day after day, year after year, at a small writing table, tucked away in her room. It's like climbing an intellectual Everest, but in complete secret.
So our mission today is to understand that secret. We're going to trace the connection between, the constraints of her life, the intellectual rebellion that fueled her, and the unique style that was born from all that solitude.
And the dramatic story of how the world finally found her work.
Exactly. A story that's almost unbelievable, bridging old and modern American poetry decades later.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
So let's begin with the surface facts of her life, and you can see how quickly the contradictions start to pile up. She was born December 10th, 1830. Emily was clearly a quick-witted, very original child.
Oh, absolutely.
She had a strong formal education, 7 years at Amherst Academy, a year at Mount Holyoke Female Seminary. And we know from early accounts that she showed this unmistakable talent for language. She would delight her classmates with these funny, original, rhyming stories.
But her education wasn't just from school books. It came from the very air she breathed. Her family home was called the homestead.
The mansion house, right?
Exactly, the mansion house. Because it was so prominent, this wasn't some remote little cabin in the woods. It was a real intellectual hub.
So you have to think about that for a moment, while Emily is slowly starting to retreat upstairs to her room.
The great minds of the age are gathering in the parlor right downstairs. Distinguished thinkers, authors, even the massive transcendentalist figure, Ralph Waldo Emerson, was walking through her front door to visit her father.
So her seclusion was chosen within this highly stimulating environment.
Yes, which just makes her decision to withdraw all the more complex.
That's what's so fascinating. If the world's most interesting minds were literally downstairs, why did she choose her room? Was she, rejecting them? Or was she just trying to find the only space where her own radical mind could truly flourish?
I think it was the latter. Because her immediate environment was just defined by tension.
Primarily with her father.
Primarily with her powerful and very complicated relationship with her father, Edward Dickinson. He was a hugely respected state legislator, a U.S. congressman, just a formidable figure of, New England establishment and strict Calvinist morality.
And yet her feelings about him were so much more than simple resentment. The depth of it all, that contradictory admiration, it comes through in that amazing quote where she describes him.
His heart was pure and terrible.
Pure and terrible. That just captures everything, doesn't it? The moral certainty of the time, the high expectations, and the emotional force he exerted over the entire family.
It absolutely sets the stage for everything that follows. And that formidable, terrible purity directly fueled her quiet rebellion. She lived under his roof, but she was challenging his worldview silently, in ink. We know from our sources she grew up being disallowed from reading certain books her father thought were radical.
Like Walt Whitman.
For instance, the passionate democratic works of Walt Whitman were strictly forbidden. Her father was trying to control her intellectual environment, but that only pushed her toward finding her own freedom in secret.
So she had to sneak in other books he considered, too inappropriate for a young woman.
Exactly.
And what's important here is that this wasn't just some teenage defiance. This act of intellectual subterfuge, it really set the theme for her entire creative life. She cultivated her unique voice because of those constraints.
Learning to experiment, to speak her truth in private journals and letters, knowing the official world, her father's world, would just disapprove.
She learned to find intellectual freedom in secrecy, and that freedom would eventually transform poetry.
And that transformation began with the architecture of the poems themselves. She wasn't just writing interesting things, she was fundamentally rebuilding the structure of American verse.
Her poetic style is just famous for its, almost explosive compression. Short, compact phrases that express this deep emotion and at the same time provoke intense philosophical thought.
It really feels like poetry distilled down to its absolute essence.
No wasted words.
None. And what's fascinating here is the technical innovation that let her break from the past and become that crucial bridge to modern American poetry. She consciously rejected the common meter that had dominated English verse for centuries. Iambic pentameter.
Okay, so for those of us who, didn't spend a lot of time memorizing Shakespeare, what does that actually feel like?
Iambic pentameter is that steady, formal rhythm. People often describe it as sounding like a grand march, a line of verse with 10 syllables, usually following a da-dee-um, da-dee-um, da-dee-um pattern. Think of it as the sound of the formal English establishment. Poetry meant to be spoken on a stage or in a royal court. It's majestic, but it's also very predictable.
And Dickinson just...
She tossed that grand formal march aside. She preferred what's called the hymn meter.
From church songs.
Exactly, from church songs and common ballads. It combines syllables in a specific but much more flexible way. And critically, it lends itself perfectly to being sung.
So she chose the structure of accessible, everyday devotion over the structure of highbrow literary tradition.
It was a conscious choice, a way to democratize the rhythm of her most profound thoughts. The hymn meter, or common measure, is fundamentally about utility, accessibility. It's the meter of the everyday songbook.
And this is where we get that fun, memorable detail that really shines a light on her choice.
It really is.
Because her structure is so inherently musical and accessible, some of her most serious, deeply introspective poems can actually be sung almost without adjustment to completely unlikely tunes.
Like the Yellow Rose of Texas.
Or even the Gilligan's Island theme song.
I strongly encourage you to try it sometime. It sounds funny, but it's a brilliant way to understand her technical decision. She took this simple, common musical structure and then loaded it with revolutionary philosophical weight.
So moving from that technical shift to the emotional and philosophical content, we have to dive into her two major thematic pillars, faith and hope. It's so clear that while she was profoundly spiritual, her views on religion were just fundamentally different from her very strictly traditional family.
She was dealing with the crushing theological reality of 19th century New England, which was Calvinism. And this system was incredibly restrictive for an inquiring mind like hers. The defining doctrine she really wrestled with was limited atonement.
The idea that salvation was predestined.
Right, reserved only for a select few. And human effort, good deeds, even your earnest belief couldn't necessarily change that fate.
And for Emily, who valued individual thought and effort so highly,
this system of divine favoritism, of cosmic fatalism, was just intensely frustrating. She saw institutional religion as a structure designed to contain and define mystery, which to her was something inherently boundless.
That tension, that frustration with systems of blind faith, it is just perfectly crystallized in the poem simply called Faith.
It really is.
She's not rejecting spiritual inquiry, not at all, but she demands intellectual rigor in that inquiry. She essentially says that blind belief is fine for those who already have certainty, but when you're faced with a real emergency, a true mystery, you need empirical scientific tools.
She brings science and skepticism right into the theological conversation.
With that incredibly sharp couplet, it's a total mic drop moment.
It is.
Faith is a fine invention for gentlemen who see, but microscopes are prudent in an emergency.
She's saying, when the stakes are real, I need proof. Not just pleasant assurance, it's the ultimate critique of a restrictive theology. It fails you precisely when you need it most. It's insufficient for the genuine crises of the soul.
But her skepticism about that rigid institutional faith is so beautifully balanced by her incredible articulation of hope.
Yes. If faith was too restrictive, hope was something internal, boundless. And we see that in one of her most famous works, Hope is the Thing with Feathers.
What's so remarkable about this poem is how she takes this abstract concept, hope, and gives it an immediate, visceral reality. It's not an idea, it's a bird that perches in the soul.
And it does one thing constantly. It sings the tune without the words. It never
A
stops.
fundamental, nonverbal constant within us.
And she emphasizes the resilience of this internal force. She writes that its song is heard sweetest in the gale.
Meaning it's strongest when things are at their absolute worst.
Exactly. Most audible, most necessary. Hope is defined by its ability to endure stress.
And she gives the bird these incredibly specific attributes, detailing its profound generosity. It persists in the chillest land and on the strangest sea. So in the remotest, most hostile conditions you can imagine. Yet, even when facing extremity, it asks for nothing in return.
That is the defining detail, and the poetic genius of the metaphor. The bird, never in extremity, it asked a crumb of me. Hope, as Dickinson defines it, is an internal gift. It requires no external payment, no sustenance, even when you are facing the worst storms. It is self-sustaining resilience.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because these two themes, faith and hope, which seem separate, one she critiques, the other she embraces, they actually join together in her work. Her critique of blind faith allows her to define a purer, more resilient hope.
Yes, the broader philosophical sources we reviewed confirm this intrinsic link. They note that hope has to stem from some form of internal assurance, or faith, and Dickinson's own work provides the poetic evidence.
So if faith, her kind of faith, is the willingness to examine the unseen,
Then that willingness provides the anchor for the hope bird to perch. She found her own way to anchor herself, synthesizing a deeply personal spiritual resilience that was entirely her own, completely independent of the church.
so she had the courage to dismantle the theology she inherited, but she used those dismantled pieces to build something stronger.
An internal, indestructible system of hope and belief.
And all of this was happening within the four walls of her room.
And that entire system of creation remained completely hidden from the public. She died without any public recognition for this brilliance. She lived a life connected almost entirely through her voluminous daily correspondence, but the world just didn't know her work. She died at age 55 after years of frail health.
Which brings us to the absolutely critical, really heart-stopping moment of her legacy. It's a moment of near destruction that is just astonishing. When Emily died, she left specific instructions for her sister, Lavinia.
To burn her personal papers.
Imagine that.
Imagine that moment. Lavinia, and thank goodness for every reader born since, simply could not bring herself to do it. She ignored the demand to destroy everything. Instead, she found and saved a simple wooden box.
And inside,
Were those more than 1,700 handwritten poems carefully stitched together into these little bundles she called fascicles?
a total literary catastrophe averted by a sibling's hesitation. That box, that chance discovery, is the entire reason we know her name today.
Absolutely. If Lavinia had followed the letter of the law, a massive, irreplaceable piece of American literary history, the very bridge between the old and new styles would have just vanished forever.
But the path to recognition was still long, even after that dramatic discovery.
Oh, very long. The saved poems were eventually given to a family friend, Mabel Todd, and a scholar, Thomas Wentworth Higginson. And they faced this huge problem. Dickinson wrote in a radically unconventional way. Erratic punctuation, capitalization, all over the place.
They spent years just trying to organize and, well, normalize her work for the public. Todd and Higginson helped compile and publish the very first edition of her poems in 1893. But even then, they edited her work so heavily,
They were trying to make her look more conventional.
trying to fit her genius into the neat little box of 19th century expectations.
And it wasn't until the mid-20th century that scholars finally decided to publish her work exactly as she wrote it, dashes, idiosyncrasies, and all.
So what does this all mean?
It means Emily Dickinson, the ultimate private poet, only received praise posthumously, and only decades later was she actually read in the form she intended. She was a writer, writing for herself, for her inner circle, conducting a silent revolution that eventually just roared across the world of literature.
And made her one of the most renowned poets of the English language.
Her power lies precisely in that contrast, the solitude and the linguistic precision. She discovered the truth of the world and the self not through external exploration, but through these short, compact insights, delivered without ceremony, finding the sublime in the smallest, most private space.
What an incredible legacy, built on rebellion, solitude, and the lucky hesitation of a sister. A bright, deeply introspective writer who managed to revolutionize poetry simply by choosing a small writing table and a metric structure meant for singing.
And here is a final provocative thought for you to carry forward as you consider her work. We spent time discussing her rejection of restrictive, organized religion and her very specific choice of the hymn meter structure, that accessible, simple meter designed for singing hymns and common songs.
Right.
So considering her serious, singular views on faith, hope, and life, and knowing her poems can be sung to popular, sometimes lighthearted tunes, how does the musicality and accessibility of the structure she shows influence the gravity and the perception of her deepest theological and philosophical explorations?
That's a great question.
Does the common song structure make her radical ideas more palatable? Or does it somehow heighten the intensity of her unique spiritual vision? That's something worth mulling over every single time you encounter a Dickinson dash.
Thank you for joining us for this day in his story. May the lessons of yesterday inspire you to see God's hand today and to play your part in his story now. For more faith-based learning, visit ahsworldwide.org, the homeschool for faith and family.